Hello and welcome to the Sleepy Darwin. Whether you're curled up in bed, nestled on a couch, or finding a quiet moment to let your mind wander into the natural world, you've found exactly the right place. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey that takes us not to the stars above, but to the hidden universe beneath our feet. A world where ancient networks carry whispered conversations older than human language itself. This is the story of the whispering language of roots, where trees share secrets through underground highways made of living fungus, where forests function as vast, interconnected communities, and where the soil beneath every step you take pulses with chemical messages we're only just learning to understand. Now, before we descend into this underground world, I have a gentle request. If you enjoy these sleepy explorations into the wonders around us, a like and subscribe help keep this cozy corner of science alive. And I'd love to know where you're listening from. Are you in a bustling city dreaming of forests, or perhaps somewhere you can step outside and feel the earth beneath your feet? I'll do my best to keep tonight's journey soothing and contemplative. But fair warning, the secret life of plants is remarkably fascinating. I hope this isn't so intriguing that it keeps you wide awake, but if it does, at least you'll drift off knowing about the patient conversations happening in every patch of soil on Earth. So, settle in, breathe deeply, and let's discover the hidden language that connects every growing thing in one magnificent whispering network. Close your eyes for a moment, if you haven't already. Take a slow, deep breath, and let your mind drift downward. Not into sleep just yet, though that will come later, but downward through the earth beneath wherever you're resting right now. Whether you're curled up in bed, nestled on a couch, or perhaps sitting by a window watching the world grow quiet, I want you to imagine traveling down, past the surface of the soil, past the familiar world of sidewalks and floorboards, down into a realm that has been humming with conversation for longer than humans have walked this earth. You see, my sleepy friend, there's a secret beneath our feet. A secret so vast and so intricate that it makes our own internet look like a child's tin can telephone. It's a network that spans continents, connects forests, and has been facilitating conversations between living beings for over 400 million years. We call it the mycorrhizal network, though perhaps we should simply call it what it is, the Earth's original social network. Imagine, if you will, the infrastructure of a great city. Picture the cables running beneath busy streets, carrying phone calls and data streams from building to building. See the water pipes threading through the darkness, delivering life-sustaining flow to every corner of the urban landscape. Envision the electrical grid, humming quietly with the power that lights up windows and warms homes throughout the night. Now, magnify this image by 1,000, by 1,000,000, stretch it across entire continents, make it living, breathing, growing. Replace the rigid metal cables with delicate fungal threads finer than spider silk, yet stronger than steel cables in their collective power. These threads, called hyphae, weave through the soil like the most sophisticated fiber optic network ever conceived, carrying messages not in pulses of light, but in whispers of chemistry. This is the Wood Wide Web, the underground internet that connects nearly every plant on our planet in an endless conversation that never sleeps, never stops, never grows tired of sharing what it knows. The partnership that makes this possible is one of the most beautiful relationships in nature. It began so long ago that when it first emerged, the continents were still finding their places, and the first timid plants were just beginning to venture onto land. Picture those ancient pioneers, those brave little plants taking their first tentative steps out of the primordial seas, and imagine their challenge: how to gather enough nutrients from barren rock and sparse soil to survive. Enter the fungi. These remarkable organisms, neither plant nor animal but something wonderfully in between, had already been quietly decomposing and recycling the Earth's materials for millions of years. They possessed something the plants desperately needed: the ability to break down rock and organic matter, to mine minerals and nutrients from the most unlikely places, to extend their reach far beyond what any single organism could achieve alone. And so began one of the most successful partnerships in the history of life on Earth. The plants would share the sugars they created through photosynthesis, that daily miracle of turning sunlight into food. In return, the fungi would share their mineral treasures, their far-reaching networks, their ancient wisdom about surviving in the soil. It was, in essence, the world's first trade agreement. And like all the best partnerships, it turned out to be so much more than the sum of its parts. Now, let me introduce you to the citizens of this underground civilization, starting with perhaps the most familiar residents, the trees. In our metaphorical underground city, trees are the skyscrapers. They reach toward the heavens with their crowns, yes, but their true majesty lies in their foundations. A single mature tree doesn't just have roots, it has an entire root system that can extend twice as wide as the tree is tall, reaching down as deep as the tree reaches up, creating an underground mirror of the forest canopy we see above. But here's where the magic truly begins. These tree roots don't work alone. They form the most intimate partnerships with fungi, relationships so close that the root tips of most trees are actually enclosed in sheaths of fungal tissue. Imagine tiny gloves made of living fungus, fitted perfectly onto the fingertips of each root. These are called mycorrhizae, literally meaning fungus root, and they transform each tree from a solitary individual into a connected member of a vast community. The fungi are the true marvels of this underground world. If trees are the skyscrapers, then fungi are everything else. The telephone operators, the internet service providers, the postal workers, the traders on the stock exchange floor, all rolled into one. They are the living network itself. A single fungal network can be astoundingly vast. The largest known organism on our planet isn't a blue whale or a giant sequoia. It's a fungus called Armillaria ostoyi, stretching across over 2,000 acres of Oregon forest, estimated to be between 2,400 and 8,650 years old. This ancient being connects thousands of trees across miles of forest floor, facilitating conversations we're only just beginning to understand. These fungal networks operate like the most sophisticated telephone exchange ever conceived. Picture an old-fashioned operator sitting at a switchboard with hundreds of cables, connecting call after call. Hello, Oak Tree 47. I have a maple on line 3 who has some extra phosphorus to share. Douglas Fir Network. You have an urgent message from the pine grove about incoming bark beetles. But the fungi aren't just passive conduits. They're active participants, taking their own cut of every transaction, charging a reasonable fee for their services in the currency of the forest, carbon. They're running a business, and business, it turns out, is very good. This brings us to the economy of the underground city, and what a fascinating economy it is. The primary currency here isn't gold or silver, or even the paper and plastic we humans have invented. The currency of the forest is carbon, specifically the carbon-rich sugars that plants create through photosynthesis. Every day, as the sun rises and begins its journey across the sky, the trees above ground are essentially printing money. Their leaves capture sunlight and carbon dioxide, combining them with water drawn up from their roots to create glucose, sucrose, and other precious sugars. It's the oldest manufacturing process on Earth, and the products never go out of demand. Some of these sugars fuel the tree's own growth and daily operations, but remarkably, many trees share between 10 to 40% of their carbon wealth with their fungal partners. They pump these liquid assets down through their roots and trade them for services and goods in the underground marketplace. The fungi, in turn, use this carbon to power their own extensive operations. They invest it in growth, extending their networks ever further through the soil. They use it to fuel their mining operations, breaking down rock and organic matter to extract precious minerals, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and dozens of trace elements that plants need to thrive. But perhaps most remarkably, the fungi also trade in information. They carry chemical messages from plant to plant, updates on resource availability, warnings about threats, even what we might call gossip about the latest happenings in the forest community. In the economy of the Wood Wide Web, information is just as valuable as any mineral or sugar. Let me tell you the story of a single sugar molecule. Let's call her Stella. Born this morning in the leaf of a towering Douglas fir, Stella began her existence as carbon dioxide drifting on the morning breeze. Drawn into the leaf through tiny pores called stomata, where she encountered water molecules that had travelled up from deep underground. In the green factories called chloroplasts, Stella was transformed. Sunlight provided the energy, chlorophyll provided the machinery, and suddenly she found herself part of something wonderful. A molecule of glucose, sweet and energizing, and very much in demand. At first, Stella thought she might be destined for the tree's own use, perhaps to help build new wood, or to fuel the constant work of growing and maintaining this magnificent living skyscraper. But as the day wore on, she found herself being transported not upward toward the growing tips of branches, but downward, through the tree's internal highway system, toward the roots. The journey down was unlike anything Stella could have imagined. She travelled through the phloem, the tree's sugar highway, in the company of thousands of other newly minted sugar molecules, all flowing like a sweet river toward their underground destination. The tree's transportation system was more sophisticated than any human city's. No traffic jams, no delays, just the steady, purposeful flow of resources toward where they were needed most. When Stella finally arrived at the root tip, she discovered she had entered a different world entirely. The root was clothed in a living sheath of fungal tissue, and suddenly she found herself face to face with her new trading partner, a fungal cell that had been waiting for this moment, this exchange that had been happening between their kind for millions of years. The trade was swift and elegant. Stella, along with her fellow sugar molecules, was welcomed into the fungal network in exchange for a package of precious minerals that the fungus had been collecting and processing all week. Phosphorus, extracted from rock particles, nitrogen captured from decaying organic matter, trace elements gathered from sources scattered across acres of forest floor. But Stella's journey was far from over. Instead of being consumed immediately, she found herself being transported through the fungal network itself, traveling along threads so fine they could barely be seen with the naked eye, yet so numerous that a single teaspoon of forest soil might contain several miles of them. As Stella moved through this underground highway, she began to understand the true scope of the network she had joined. This wasn't just a simple trade between her Douglas fir and a single fungus. This was a vast, interconnected web that linked her tree to dozens of others. Not just other Douglas firs, but pines and maples, ferns and wildflowers, each contributing their own resources and receiving what they needed in return. She passed junctions where the fungal highways branched and merged, distribution centers where resources were sorted and redirected according to need. She witnessed something that could only be described as triage. When one part of the network sent out chemical distress signals indicating drought stress, resources were automatically rerouted to provide support. Most remarkably, Stella discovered that she wasn't just cargo in this system, she was part of a message. Her presence, combined with the specific cocktail of other molecules traveling with her, carried information about her home tree, its health, its current resource levels, even early warnings about potential threats like insect attacks or diseases. When Stella finally reached her destination, a young maple seedling struggling to establish itself in the shadow of the great Douglas fir, she realized she had become part of something much larger than a simple economic transaction. She had become part of an act of generosity, a sharing of abundance that would help ensure the health and diversity of the entire forest community. The young maple, upon receiving Stella and her companions, sent its own contribution back through the network. Not carbon. It didn't have much to spare yet, but information. Chemical signals that updated the network about soil conditions in its particular patch of forest, about the microscopic community of bacteria and other fungi it was working with, about its own genetic heritage, and the unique chemical compounds it was capable of producing as it matured. This is how a forest becomes a family. Not through simple genetic relationships, but through these countless daily exchanges of resources and information. The mycorrhizal network creates bonds between trees that transcend species, age, and even location. Old-growth trees become the grandparents of the forest, sharing their accumulated wealth with newcomers. Different species become trading partners, each contributing their unique gifts to the community. Over the course of a single growing season, Stella learned, the network would facilitate millions of such exchanges. Sugar molecules would flow from trees flush with sunlight to those growing in shade. Minerals would travel from areas of abundance to where they were desperately needed. Chemical warnings would spread through the network faster than any threat could travel above ground. And all of this would happen in the quiet darkness beneath our feet, conducted in the patient whispers of chemistry, orchestrated by organisms that have no brains and yet display a collective intelligence that rivals our most sophisticated computer networks. The most beautiful part of Stella's story? By the time winter came, her carbon atoms would have been incorporated into the wood of that young maple, becoming part of its growing structure. Years from now, that tree would be large enough to shade its own seedlings, and Stella's atoms would still be there, part of the permanent record of one small act of forest generosity. Let's pause here for a moment, you and I, and simply marvel at what we've discovered together. Take a slow, deep breath, and as you exhale, let your imagination drift back to that vast network humming quietly beneath us. Right now, as you rest wherever you are, conversations are happening in the soil, beneath your building, beneath the street outside your window, beneath every garden and park and wild space on Earth, the mycorrhizal networks are carrying on their ancient work. Sugar molecules are flowing like sweet rivers from tree to tree. Mineral treasures are being shared with the generosity of old friends. Chemical messages are traveling through fungal networks at speeds that would make our fiber optic cables jealous. If you're listening to this in a city, know that even there, in the spaces between concrete and asphalt, the networks persist. The trees lining your streets are still connected, still sharing resources through fungal partners that have found ways to thrive even in our human-dominated landscapes. The park across town, the green belt along the river, the houseplants on your windowsill, all are part of this greater conversation. And if you're somewhere rural, somewhere you can step outside and place your bare feet on Earth, know that you're standing on top of one of the most sophisticated communication networks ever evolved. Every step you take crosses thousands of fungal highways. Every tree you see is both an individual and a member of a community more tightly knit than most human neighborhoods. Think about this. The internet that connects our human world is barely 50 years old. The Wood Wide Web has been operating for over 400 million years. It was facilitating complex resource sharing and information exchange when the first amphibians were learning to breathe air, when the first insects were learning to fly, when the first seeds were developing the courage to grow into trees. This network has survived ice ages and asteroid impacts, continental drift and climate changes that would have challenged any system we humans have ever built. It has not only survived, it has thrived, grown more complex, more interconnected, more generous with each passing millennium. Perhaps most wonderfully of all, we've only just begun to understand it. The research that revealed these fungal networks is so recent that many of the scientists who discovered them are still alive, still working, still uncovering new marvels in the soil. We're like children who have just discovered that the adults have been having fascinating conversations in the next room all along, and we've finally learned enough of the language to begin listening in. Every day, researchers are discovering new aspects of these underground communities. Trees that can recognize their own offspring and give them preferential treatment. Fungi that seem to make strategic decisions about where to invest their resources. Networks that display what can only be called memory, adjusting their resource flows based on past experiences with drought or abundance. We're learning that forests don't just contain ecosystems, they are ecosystems. Vast, interconnected organisms where the boundaries between individual trees become as blurred as the boundaries between organs in our own bodies. The mycorrhizal network is the forest's nervous system, its digestive system, its immune system, all rolled into one. As you continue listening tonight, I invite you to carry this image with you. Beneath every landscape on Earth, conversations are happening in the quiet language of chemistry. Resources are flowing to where they're needed most. Information is traveling through living networks that make our internet look simple by comparison. Ancient partnerships are being renewed with each exchange of carbon for minerals. Each chemical message passed from root to fungal thread to root again. You are never walking alone on this Earth, my sleepy friend. You are walking on top of a civilization so vast and interconnected that we humans are only just beginning to comprehend its scope. With every step, you cross the pathways of conversations that have been continuing for longer than our species has existed. And perhaps, if you listen very carefully in the quiet moments before sleep, you might just hear it. The soft whisper of roots and fungi conducting their ancient business in the dark. The gentle hum of a network that connects all growing things in the most beautiful conversation our planet has ever known. Rest well, knowing that the Earth itself is dreaming beneath you. And those dreams are being shared through networks more intricate than anything we've ever built, more generous than anything we've ever imagined, and more ancient than anything we can fully comprehend. The Wood Wide Web never sleeps, and neither does the wonder it inspires in those of us just beginning to learn its secret language. Imagine, if you will, that you've just discovered a new language, not one written in books or spoken with voices, but one whispered in molecules so small that billions of them could dance on the head of a pin. This is the language of plants, a chemical vocabulary that has been evolving for hundreds of millions of years, growing richer and more sophisticated with each passing season. As you settle deeper into your comfortable spot, let your mind wander into this molecular world where every scent, every chemical compound, carries meaning as precise as any word in any human language. Plants, you see, are constantly talking. They're just doing it in a way we humans never thought to listen for until very recently. The basic grammar of plant communication is surprisingly elegant. Like human languages, it has evolved to serve the most essential functions of any social species: warning of danger, sharing resources, coordinating group responses, and maintaining the bonds that hold communities together. But instead of using sound waves traveling through air, plants use chemical compounds traveling through soil, air, and the fungal networks we met in our first chapter. Let's start with perhaps the most urgent messages in the plant vocabulary: the alarm calls. When a plant finds itself under attack, whether from hungry insects, invasive fungi, or browsing deer, it doesn't suffer in silence. Instead, it releases a cocktail of volatile organic compounds, chemical distress signals that can travel through the air and the soil to warn its neighbors. Picture an aspen grove on a quiet summer morning. The leaves are rustling gently in the breeze, and to our human senses, all seems peaceful. But suddenly, a family of caterpillars begins munching on the leaves of one particular tree. Within minutes, that tree begins releasing chemical alarm pheromones, compounds with names like methyl jasmonate and ethylene that might sound industrial to us, but to other plants, they're as clear as someone shouting "fire!" In a crowded theatre, these chemical alarm calls can travel remarkably distances. A single distressed plant can alert neighbors up to 60 feet away, giving them precious time to prepare their defenses. And what defenses they are! Upon receiving these chemical warnings, nearby plants begin producing compounds that make their leaves less palatable, less nutritious, or even toxic to potential attackers. It's as if the entire grove becomes a neighborhood watch, with each tree standing ready to protect not just itself, but the community as a whole. The sophistication of these alarm systems would impress any security expert. Plants can send different chemical messages depending on what type of threat they're facing. The alarm call for leaf-eating caterpillars is different from the one for root-attacking beetles, which is different from the warning about approaching drought conditions. Each threat has its own chemical signature, its own specific vocabulary in the molecular language of the forest. But plants don't just talk about danger. They also share news of abundance, and these conversations are among the most heartwarming in the natural world. When a tree has produced more resources than it can use, perhaps after a particularly sunny week, or when its root system has struck a rich vein of nutrients, it doesn't hoard these treasures. Instead, it shares them through the fungal networks, like a neighbor passing along extra cookies to the family next door. These messages of abundance are written in the grammar of generosity. Surplus sugars flow through mycorrhizal networks, accompanied by chemical signals that essentially say, "I have enough, please take what you need." The receiving plants respond with their own chemical thank you notes, compounds that strengthen the fungal partnerships, and sometimes even chemical gifts in return. Perhaps rare minerals they've been collecting, or defensive compounds that might help protect their generous neighbor. The most beautiful aspect of this chemical conversation is how it changes throughout the seasons. In spring, the messages are full of excitement and anticipation, chemical compounds that signal the beginning of growth, the coordination of leaf-out timing, the sharing of stored winter reserves. Summer conversations buzz with the constant exchange of current resources and warnings about immediate threats. Fall brings messages of preparation, chemical signals that coordinate the great shutdown of winter dormancy, and the careful storage of resources for the long sleep ahead. Even winter has its own quiet chemical vocabulary. Though the conversations slow dramatically in the cold, they never entirely stop. Evergreen trees continue their low-level chemical chatter, sharing just enough resources to maintain the networks through the frozen months. Root systems remain connected through their fungal partners, maintaining the bonds that will burst back into full conversation when spring returns. Just as human cultures have developed different languages and dialects, the plant kingdom has evolved an astonishing diversity of chemical communication styles. Each species has its own particular way of speaking, its own chemical accent, if you will, that reflects its evolutionary history and ecological niche. Oak trees, those stately monarchs of temperate forests, speak in what we might call a classical dialect. Their chemical vocabulary is rich and complex, built over millions of years of coevolution with countless other forest species. When an oak tree sends out alarm signals, it uses a sophisticated blend of compounds that can convey not just the presence of danger, but specific details about the threat. What type of insect is attacking? Which leaves are affected? Even the time of day the attack began. Oak chemical communications tend to be measured and deliberate, much like the trees themselves. An oak doesn't panic easily, and its chemical messages reflect this calm disposition. When an oak tree warns its neighbors about drought conditions, it does so with a gradual increase in stress hormones that gives other trees plenty of time to prepare. When it shares resources, it does so steadily and reliably, like a banker making regular, dependable transactions. Pine trees, on the other hand, speak in a more urgent, immediate dialect. Living often in harsher environments where threats can develop quickly, pines have evolved a chemical vocabulary that emphasizes rapid response and clear, unmistakable signals. When a pine tree detects the presence of bark beetles, one of their most dangerous enemies, it releases a chemical alarm so intense and specific that it can mobilize the defenses of an entire forest within hours. The pine chemical dialect is also notable for its use of aromatic compounds, the terpenes that give pine forests their distinctive resinous scent. These molecules serve multiple purposes. They're part of the tree's natural defense system. They help coordinate responses to threats, and they even help regulate the local climate by influencing cloud formation and rainfall patterns. In essence, pine trees are speaking not just to each other, but to the sky itself. Deciduous trees like maples and birches have developed what we might call a seasonal dialect. Their chemical vocabulary changes dramatically throughout the year, reflecting their cyclical lifestyle. In spring, newly unfurling maple leaves release compounds that coordinate the timing of leaf out across entire forest stands. In fall, the chemical conversations become increasingly focused on resource conservation and the preparation for dormancy. Perhaps most fascinating are the chemical dialects of tropical rainforest trees, where the sheer diversity of species has led to an explosion of chemical communication strategies. In a single hectare of Amazon rainforest, hundreds of tree species might be engaged in chemical conversations, each using its own particular molecular vocabulary. Some species have become chemical specialists, producing unique compounds that serve as their signature in the forest's chemical symphony. The strangers in this linguistic landscape are the conifers of boreal forests, spruce, fir, and larch trees that have adapted to life in some of Earth's harshest climates. Their chemical dialect is spare and efficient, focused on the essential messages needed for survival in a world of long winters and short growing seasons. When a boreal forest speaks, it does so in the chemical equivalent of poetry written in snow, spare, beautiful, and absolutely essential. But here's where the story becomes truly remarkable. Despite all these different dialects, the plants of the forest aren't speaking past each other. This is where our fungal friends become the ultimate universal translators. The mycorrhizal fungi that connect plant roots into networks have evolved the ability to speak multiple plant chemical languages. A single fungal network might be simultaneously connected to oak trees, pine trees, ferns, and wildflowers, each speaking their own chemical dialect. The fungi not only facilitate these conversations, they translate them, converting the chemical messages of one species into forms that other species can understand and respond to. It's as if the forest floor is populated by billions of tiny translators, each one fluent in multiple plant languages, working tirelessly to facilitate communication across species barriers. This fungal translation service is so sophisticated that it can even help plants from different continents communicate when they're brought together in new environments. Regional accents in plant communication are just as real as they are in human languages. The chemical dialect of a Douglas fir growing in the Pacific Northwest is subtly different from that of a Douglas fir growing in the Rocky Mountains. These regional variations reflect local adaptations to climate, soil conditions, and the particular community of other organisms each population lives with. Perhaps most charmingly, young plants seem to learn the local chemical dialect from their elders. Seedlings growing up in established forests gradually adjust their chemical communications to match the local style, like children picking up the accent of their neighborhood. This chemical apprenticeship helps integrate new plants into existing forest communities and ensures that the local communication networks function smoothly. For most of human history, these chemical conversations were completely invisible to us. We walked through forests surrounded by constant chatter, unaware that every tree, every shrub, every patch of moss was engaged in complex communications that would have fascinated us beyond measure, if only we had known how to listen. The breakthrough came in the latter half of the 20th century, when scientists began developing the tools necessary to eavesdrop on nature's chemical conversations. Like learning to use radio telescopes to listen to the cosmos, researchers had to invent entirely new ways of sensing and interpreting the molecular messages flowing through forest ecosystems. One of the most elegant techniques involves the use of radioactive carbon tracers. Picture this. A scientist carefully injects a tiny amount of radioactive carbon dioxide into the air around a tree's leaves. The tree, doing what trees do, absorbs this carbon and incorporates it into the sugars produced through photosynthesis. But here's the beautiful part. By using special detection equipment, researchers can then track exactly where these radioactive sugar molecules travel. What they discovered was revolutionary. The radioactive carbon didn't stay in the original tree. Instead, it began showing up in neighboring trees, sometimes within hours. It traveled through the soil via fungal networks, crossing species boundaries with ease. A sugar molecule, created in the leaves of a birch tree, might end up incorporated into the wood of a nearby fir tree by the end of the same day. Dr. Suzanne Simard, one of the pioneers of this research, describes her early experiments with the wonder of someone who had just learned to speak a new language. She would inject carbon tracers into paper birch trees and then use a Geiger counter, yes, the same instrument used to detect radiation, to track the movement of resources through forest networks. The clicking of the Geiger counter became her way of listening in on forest conversations, each click representing sugar molecules carrying messages from tree to tree. In one of her most famous experiments, Dr. Simard demonstrated that Douglas fir and paper birch trees, growing together in the same forest, were actively sharing resources through their fungal partners. During the summer, when the birch trees were in full leaf and producing excess sugars, they would share these resources with the fir trees growing in their shade. But in the fall, when the birch trees began to lose their leaves and shut down photosynthesis, the flow reversed. The evergreen fir trees began sharing their resources with their deciduous neighbours, helping them maintain their root systems through the winter months. This wasn't just resource sharing, it was forest-level cooperation on a scale that challenged everything scientists thought they knew about plant competition. These trees weren't just neighbours, they were partners, actively supporting each other's survival through the changing seasons. Other researchers developed techniques for capturing and analysing the volatile chemical compounds that plants release into the air. Using instruments called gas chromatographs and mass spectrometers, devices that can identify molecules by their precise chemical signatures, scientists began creating libraries of plant chemical communications. What they found was astounding. Plants were far more chemically chatty than anyone had imagined. A single tree might release dozens of different chemical compounds in a single day, each one carrying specific information about the tree's condition, its needs, its warnings, or its offers of assistance. Some of the most surprising discoveries came from studying what researchers playfully called forest gossip, the rapid spread of information through plant communities. When one tree in a forest was attacked by insects, chemical warning signals would spread through the community far faster than the insects themselves could travel. Trees hundreds of feet away from the original attack would begin producing defensive compounds within hours, preparing for a threat that might never actually reach them. This chemical gossip network proved to be remarkably sophisticated. Trees could distinguish between false alarms and genuine threats, adjusting their responses accordingly. They could even remember previous attacks, mounting stronger and faster chemical defenses when familiar threats returned. Perhaps most remarkably, researchers discovered that plants could eavesdrop on the chemical conversations of other species and respond appropriately. A shrub growing beneath a tree could listen in on the tree's chemical distress calls and begin preparing its own defenses, even if it wasn't directly threatened. This interspecies eavesdropping created layers of communication within forest communities that resembled nothing so much as the complex social networks of highly intelligent animals. The tools for studying plant chemical communication continue to evolve. Modern researchers use infrared spectrometers that can detect chemical signals in real time, advanced imaging techniques that can visualize the flow of resources through fungal networks, and even artificial intelligence systems that can help decode the meaning of complex chemical messages. One of the most exciting recent developments is the use of volatile collection systems that can capture and analyze the chemical breadth of entire forest communities. These systems reveal that forests have their own unique chemical signatures, their own particular bouquet of molecular conversations that changes with the seasons, the weather, and the health of the community. The research has revealed that plants are not the silent, passive organisms we once thought them to be. Instead, They're active participants in complex chemical conversations that rival human social networks in their sophistication and exceed them in their generosity and cooperation. As we pause here together in our exploration of the forest's hidden language, let your mind rest for a moment on this remarkable truth. You have never walked through a silent forest. Every forest you've ever visited, every garden you've ever enjoyed, every park where you've ever found peace, all of them were alive with conversations you couldn't hear, messages flowing in chemical whispers too subtle for human senses to detect. Think about the implications of what we've discovered. Plants, those organisms we've long considered the most passive inhabitants of our world, are actually engaged in constant communication. They're warning each other of dangers, sharing resources with neighbors in need, coordinating responses to environmental challenges, and maintaining social networks that span entire ecosystems. In many ways, their communication systems are more sophisticated than our own. While human conversations are often fleeting, plant chemical messages can persist in soil and air for hours or even days, ensuring that important information reaches its intended recipients. While we humans sometimes struggle to communicate across cultural and linguistic barriers, plants routinely share information across species lines with the help of their fungal translators. There's something deeply humbling about realizing that the natural world has been carrying on complex conversations all around us, conversations we were completely unaware of until just a few decades ago. It reminds us that despite all our technological achievements, there are still fundamental aspects of life on Earth that we're only beginning to understand. The chemical conversations of plants also offer us a different model for thinking about communication itself. In our human world, we often think of communication as something that happens between separate individuals. But in the forest, the boundaries between individual organisms become beautifully blurred. When a tree shares resources with its neighbors through fungal networks, when it warns distant community members of approaching threats, when it participates in the collective chemical conversations that coordinate forest-wide responses to environmental changes, is it acting as an individual or as part of a larger collective intelligence? Perhaps most remarkably, mother trees seem to adjust their support based on need. Seedlings growing in particularly difficult spots, deep shade, poor soil, or exposed locations, receive more resources than those in favorable conditions. It's as if the mother trees are practicing a form of ecological triage, ensuring that their most vulnerable community members receive the help they need to survive. The relationship between mother trees and forest children isn't limited to their own offspring. While genetic relatives do receive preferential treatment, the network supports seedlings of many different species. A Douglas fir mother tree might simultaneously be supporting Douglas fir seedlings that carry its genes, hemlock seedlings from a distant parent, maple saplings that sprouted from wind-blown seeds, and fern patches that add diversity to the forest understory. This cross-species nurturing creates forests of remarkable diversity and resilience. Seedlings that might never survive on their own are given the chance to establish themselves and contribute their unique gifts to the forest community. The result is the complex, multi-layered forest ecosystems that support countless species of plants, animals, fungi, and microorganisms. Dr. Simard's research has shown that this nurturing continues for years, sometimes decades. A sapling that received crucial support as a seedling will continue to benefit from network resources as it grows, gradually taking on more responsibility for supporting other community members. Eventually, if it survives to maturity, it too may become a hub in the network, and ultimately, if it lives long enough, a mother tree itself. The generosity extends beyond individual relationships to community-wide support systems. When environmental stresses threaten the entire forest, drought, disease outbreaks, insect infestations, the mother trees coordinate community responses. They increase resource sharing, boost chemical communication, and even appear to make sacrifices for the good of the whole community. Old trees have been observed pouring resources into supporting younger trees during crises, sometimes weakening themselves in the process. This communal child-rearing creates forests that function more like extended families than collections of competing individuals. Young trees grow up connected not just to their genetic parents, but to an entire community of adults invested in their success. They inherit not just genes, but access to vast networks of relationships, accumulated ecological knowledge, and the promise of support through whatever challenges they may face. The implications are profound. In these mother tree networks, individual success is inextricably linked to community well-being. The health of the forest depends not on the strength of single trees, but on the strength of the relationships between them. The wisdom of the elders is passed not through genes alone, but through the daily sharing of resources and information that keeps the entire community thriving. The forests where mother trees hold sway are masterclasses in resilience, not the brittle resilience of isolated individuals toughing it out alone, but the flexible, adaptive resilience that comes from deep interconnection and mutual support. These forest communities have developed strategies for surviving disturbances that would devastate less connected ecosystems, and their secret lies in the strength of their underground social networks. Consider what happens when drought strikes a forest with a strong mother tree network. The crisis begins subtly, soil moisture levels dropping, chemical stress signals increasing in frequency and intensity throughout the fungal communication networks. But instead of each tree struggling in isolation, the community responds as a coordinated whole. The mother trees, with their deep root systems and extensive water storage capacity, become emergency reservoirs for the entire community. They increase their sharing of water resources through the fungal networks, prioritizing the most vulnerable community members. Seedlings and saplings, with their shallow root systems, receive life-sustaining moisture from adults whose roots can reach groundwater many feet below the surface. At the same time, the chemical communication networks shift into crisis mode. Trees begin sharing information about water sources, successful drought survival strategies, and which areas of the forest are faring better than others. Some trees, those with access to reliable water sources, increase their resource sharing. Others, those most stressed by the drought, reduce their resource contributions while increasing their requests for help. The fungal networks automatically redistribute resources toward where they're needed most. Perhaps most remarkably, the community makes collective decisions about survival strategies. In severe droughts, some trees will actually sacrifice themselves for the good of the community. They'll pour their remaining energy into supporting smaller trees and seedlings, even as they gradually die back. These dying trees become resource caches for the surviving community. Their stored nutrients gradually released through decomposition to feed the fungal networks that connect the survivors. The resilience strategies become even more sophisticated when we consider longer-term environmental changes. Mother trees, with their centuries of experience, have weathered countless cycles of abundance and scarcity. They've developed the ability to sense environmental patterns and prepare their communities accordingly. Trees in networks with old-growth mother trees often begin preparing for winter earlier, store more resources during abundant years, and adjust their growth patterns in response to subtle environmental cues that younger trees might miss. When fires sweep through these forests, the community's response reveals another layer of their resilience strategy. While fire is often portrayed as purely destructive, many forest communities have evolved to work with fire as a natural part of their life cycle. Mother trees, with their thick bark and high canopies, are often able to survive fires that kill younger trees. But instead of being devastated by the loss of their network partners, they immediately begin coordinating recovery efforts. In the aftermath of fire, surviving mother trees increase their resource sharing dramatically, supporting the germination and establishment of a new generation of seedlings. The nutrients released by burned trees feed through the fungal networks to wherever they're needed most. The chemical communication systems, partially disrupted by the fire, rebuild quickly as surviving network hubs reach out to establish new connections. The forest's recovery from major disturbances follows patterns that would be recognizable to anyone who has watched human communities respond to disasters. There's an immediate phase of mutual aid, where surviving community members share resources freely and support the most vulnerable. There's a rebuilding phase, where new relationships are established and damaged networks are repaired. And there's an adaptation phase, where the community incorporates lessons learned from the disturbance into its long-term survival strategies. Dr. Simard has documented forests recovering from clear-cut logging, insect outbreaks, storms, and other major disturbances. In every case, forests with intact mother tree networks recovered faster and more completely than those where the mother trees had been removed. The difference wasn't just in the speed of recovery, but in the complexity and resilience of the recovered ecosystem. Forests rebuilding around surviving mother trees retained much of their original diversity and developed the same kind of interconnected resilience that characterized the original community. These lessons in resilience extend beyond individual forests to entire landscapes. Networks of mother trees in different forest stands maintain connections through fungal highways that can extend for miles. When one area is disturbed, resources and genetic material can flow from undisturbed areas to support recovery. The result is landscape-scale resilience that can withstand disturbances that would devastate isolated forest patches. The strategies these forests use: community resource sharing, early warning systems, collective decision-making, mutual aid during crises, and coordinated recovery efforts, offer profound lessons for human communities facing our own environmental and social challenges. The mother trees and their networks have spent centuries perfecting the art of surviving together, and their success suggests that our own future resilience may depend less on individual strength than on the strength of our connections to each other. There is a shadow side to this beautiful story of forest community and cooperation, and it's one that brings us face to face with the consequences of our own actions in the natural world. For all their resilience and adaptive capacity, these ancient networks have a vulnerability that has only become apparent in recent decades. They depend absolutely on the survival of their mother trees, and we humans have become very efficient at removing exactly those trees. When loggers enter a forest, they naturally target the biggest, most valuable trees, the very mother trees that serve as the nerve centers of forest communities. From a purely economic perspective, this makes perfect sense. A 400-year-old Douglas fir represents more timber value than dozens of smaller trees. But from an ecological perspective, removing a mother tree is like performing brain surgery on a forest ecosystem with a chainsaw. Perhaps most remarkably, mother trees seem to adjust their support based on need. Seedlings growing in particularly difficult spots, deep shade, poor soil, or exposed locations, receive more resources than those in favorable conditions. It's as if the mother trees are practicing a form of ecological triage, ensuring that their most vulnerable community members receive the help they need to survive. The relationship between mother trees and forest children isn't limited to their own offspring. While genetic relatives do receive preferential treatment, the network supports seedlings of many different species. A Douglas fir mother tree might simultaneously be supporting Douglas fir seedlings that carry its genes, hemlock seedlings from a distant parent, maple saplings that sprouted from wind-blown seeds, and fern patches that add diversity to the forest understory. This cross-species nurturing creates forests of remarkable diversity and resilience. Seedlings that might never survive on their own are given the chance to establish themselves and contribute their unique gifts to the forest community. The result is the complex, multi-layered forest ecosystems that support countless species of plants, animals, fungi, and microorganisms. Dr. Simard's research has shown that this nurturing continues for years, sometimes decades. A sapling that received crucial support as a seedling will continue to benefit from network resources as it grows, gradually taking on more responsibility for supporting other community members. Eventually, if it survives to maturity, it too may become a hub in the network, and ultimately, if it lives long enough, a mother tree itself. The generosity extends beyond individual relationships to community-wide support systems. When environmental stresses threaten the entire forest, drought, disease outbreaks, insect infestations, the mother trees coordinate community responses. They increase resource sharing, boost chemical communication, and even appear to make sacrifices for the good of the whole community. Old trees have been observed pouring resources into supporting younger trees during crises, sometimes weakening themselves in the process. This communal child-rearing creates forests that function more like extended families than collections of competing individuals. Young trees grow up connected not just to their genetic parents, but to an entire community of adults invested in their success. They inherit not just genes, but access to vast networks of relationships, accumulated ecological knowledge, and the promise of support through whatever challenges they may face. The implications are profound. In these mother tree networks, individual success is inextricably linked to community well-being. The health of the forest depends not on the strength of single trees, but on the strength of the relationships between them. The wisdom of the elders is passed not through genes alone, but through the daily sharing of resources and information that keeps the entire community thriving. The forests where mother trees hold sway are masterclasses in resilience, not the brittle resilience of isolated individuals toughing it out alone, but the flexible, adaptive resilience that comes from deep interconnection and mutual support. These forest communities have developed strategies for surviving disturbances that would devastate less connected ecosystems, and their secret lies in the strength of their underground social networks. Consider what happens when drought strikes a forest with a strong mother tree network. The crisis begins subtly. Soil moisture levels dropping, chemical stress signals increasing in frequency and intensity throughout the fungal communication networks. But instead of each tree struggling in isolation, the community responds as a coordinated whole. The mother trees, with their deep root systems and extensive water storage capacity, become emergency reservoirs for the entire community. They increase their sharing of water resources through the fungal networks, prioritizing the most vulnerable community members. Seedlings and saplings, with their shallow root systems, receive life-sustaining moisture from adults whose roots can reach groundwater many feet below the surface. At the same time, the chemical communication networks shift into crisis mode. Trees begin sharing information about water sources, successful drought survival strategies, and which areas of the forest are faring better than others. Some trees, those with access to reliable water sources, increase their resource sharing. Others, those most stressed by the drought, reduce their resource contributions while increasing their requests for help. The fungal networks automatically redistribute resources toward where they're needed most. Perhaps most remarkably, the community makes collective decisions about survival strategies. In severe droughts, some trees will actually sacrifice themselves for the good of the community. They'll pour their remaining energy into supporting smaller trees and seedlings, even as they gradually die back. These dying trees become resource caches for the surviving community. Their stored nutrients gradually released through decomposition to feed the fungal networks that connect the survivors. The resilience strategies become even more sophisticated when we consider longer-term environmental changes. Mother trees, with their centuries of experience, have weathered countless cycles of abundance and scarcity. They've developed the ability to sense environmental patterns and prepare their communities accordingly. Trees in networks with old-growth mother trees often begin preparing for winter earlier, store more resources during abundant years, and adjust their growth patterns in response to subtle environmental cues that younger trees might miss. When fires sweep through these forests, the community's response reveals another layer of their resilience strategy. While fire is often portrayed as purely destructive, many forest communities have evolved to work with fire as a natural part of their life cycle. Mother trees, with their thick bark and high canopies, are often able to survive fires that kill younger trees. But instead of being devastated by the loss of their network partners, they immediately begin coordinating recovery efforts. In the aftermath of fire, surviving mother trees increase their resource sharing dramatically, supporting the germination and establishment of a new generation of seedlings. The nutrients released by burned trees feed through the fungal networks to wherever they're needed most. The chemical communication systems, partially disrupted by the fire, rebuild quickly as surviving network hubs reach out to establish new connections. The forest's recovery from major disturbances follows patterns that would be recognizable to anyone who has watched human communities respond to disasters. There's an immediate phase of mutual aid, where surviving community members share resources freely and support the most vulnerable. There's a rebuilding phase, where new relationships are established and damaged networks are repaired. And there's an adaptation phase, where the community incorporates lessons learned from the disturbance into its long-term survival strategies. Dr. Simard has documented forests recovering from clear-cut logging, insect outbreaks, storms, and other major disturbances. In every case, forests with intact mother tree networks recovered faster and more completely than those where the mother trees had been removed. The difference wasn't just in the speed of recovery, but in the complexity and resilience of the recovered ecosystem. Forests rebuilding around surviving mother trees retained much of their original diversity and developed the same kind of interconnected resilience that characterized the original community. These lessons in resilience extend beyond individual forests to entire landscapes. Networks of mother trees in different forest stands maintain connections through fungal highways that can extend for miles. When one area is disturbed, resources and genetic material can flow from undisturbed areas to support recovery. The result is landscape-scale resilience that can withstand disturbances that would devastate isolated forest patches. The strategies these forests use — community resource sharing, early warning systems, collective decision-making, mutual aid during crises, and coordinated recovery efforts — offer profound lessons for human communities facing our own environmental and social challenges. The mother trees and their networks have spent centuries perfecting the art of surviving together, and their success suggests that our own future resilience may depend less on individual strength than on the strength of our connections to each other. There is a shadow side to this beautiful story of forest community and cooperation, and it's one that brings us face to face with the consequences of our own actions in the natural world. For all their resilience and adaptive capacity, these ancient networks have a vulnerability that has only become apparent in recent decades. They depend absolutely on the survival of their mother trees, and we humans have become very efficient at removing exactly those trees. When loggers enter a forest, they naturally target the biggest, most valuable trees, the very mother trees that serve as the nerve centers of forest communities. From a purely economic perspective, this makes perfect sense. A 400-year-old Douglas fir represents more timber value than dozens of smaller trees. But from an ecological perspective, removing a mother tree is like performing brain surgery on a forest ecosystem with a chainsaw. Dr. Simard's research has documented what happens when mother trees are removed from forest networks, and the results are both scientifically fascinating and heartbreakingly sad. The immediate effects ripple through the community within days. Seedlings and saplings that were receiving crucial resources through the mother tree's network suddenly find themselves cut off from their primary life support system. Chemical communication pathways are severed, leaving parts of the forest community isolated and unable to coordinate responses to threats. The fungal networks, those remarkable underground highways that connected the mother tree to hundreds of other plants, begin to break down. Without the steady flow of carbon from the mother tree, many fungal partners die back or redirect their efforts toward remaining network hubs. The result is a fragmentation of the forest's communication and resource-sharing systems that can take decades to rebuild, if they rebuild at all. Perhaps most tragically, the accumulated ecological knowledge represented by the mother tree is lost instantly and permanently. Those centuries of adaptation to local conditions, those vast networks of relationships, those finely tuned chemical communication systems, all gone in the few hours it takes to fell a single tree. It's as if an entire library were burned, taking with it not just books but the irreplaceable wisdom of generations. The ripple effects continue for years. Seedlings that would have survived with mother tree support begin dying in higher numbers. The forest's ability to respond to environmental stresses is compromised. Disease outbreaks that might have been contained through network-wide immune responses spread more widely. The complex biodiversity that thrived under the mother tree's care begins to simplify into less resilient monocultures. Studies of forests logged using traditional practices, where the biggest trees are removed and smaller ones are left, show patterns of decline that can persist for decades. These forests often fail to regenerate the complex, diverse communities that existed before logging. Instead, they develop into simplified ecosystems, dominated by a few fast-growing species, lacking the intricate networks of relationships that characterized the original forest. The loss extends beyond single forest stands. When mother trees are removed from landscapes across entire regions, the connections between forest patches are severed. The landscape-scale resilience provided by interconnected networks is replaced by isolated forest fragments, each more vulnerable to disturbances and less capable of recovery. But here's where the story takes a turn toward hope. Dr. Simard and other researchers have begun working with forest managers to develop logging practices that preserve mother trees and maintain network integrity. These approaches, sometimes called retention forestry, focus on harvesting younger trees while leaving the network hubs intact. The result is forests that can be managed for human needs while preserving the ecological relationships that maintain forest health. Some of the most encouraging results come from forests, where logging has been designed to mimic natural disturbances like fires or windstorms. Instead of clear-cutting entire areas, these approaches create a mosaic of harvested and unharvested patches, leaving mother trees and network connections intact across the landscape. Forests managed this way recover more quickly, maintain higher biodiversity, and develop the same kind of networked resilience that characterizes old-growth ecosystems. Even more remarkably, some forests are demonstrating an ability to adapt and rebuild their networks even after severe disruption. Young trees growing in areas where mother trees have been removed sometimes develop enhanced networking capabilities, as if the forest community is working to recreate the connections it has lost. It's a slower process than maintaining existing networks, but it suggests that the drive toward interconnection is so fundamental to forest ecology that it will reassert itself even after major disruptions. The bittersweet truth is that we now understand what we've been unconsciously destroying for decades, but we also have the knowledge to do better. Every forest management decision, every urban planning choice, every individual action that affects tree survival is now informed by this understanding of how forest communities really work. We can choose to work with these natural networks rather than against them, to support the mother trees rather than targeting them, to help forests maintain their ancient wisdom rather than starting over from scratch with each generation. As we draw this chapter to a close, let your mind rest on the profound parallels between the forest families we've explored and the human communities we know so well. There's something deeply familiar about the way mother trees nurture their forest children, something that resonates with our own experiences of family, community, and the passing of wisdom from one generation to the next. Like human grandmothers, the mother trees have moved beyond the immediate struggles of youth into a phase of life characterized by generosity and community care. They've accumulated resources, knowledge, and networks of relationships that they share freely with younger generations. They serve as anchors of stability in their communities, sources of support during difficult times, and repositories of wisdom accumulated through long experience. The way mother trees recognize and preferentially support their own offspring, while still caring for the broader forest community, mirrors the best of human family structures. We see the same balance between genetic loyalty and community responsibility, the same understanding that individual success is inseparable from community well-being, the same willingness to sacrifice for the next generation. The forest's response to crisis. The immediate mobilization of mutual aid, the sharing of resources based on need rather than ability to pay, the collective decision-making that prioritizes community survival over individual advantage, offers a model for human resilience that we might do well to study more carefully. These forests have been practicing sophisticated forms of socialism for millions of years, and their success suggests that cooperation, rather than competition, may be the most powerful survival strategy available to complex communities. Perhaps most powerfully, the forest networks remind us that wisdom is not just individual knowledge, but collective understanding, embedded in relationships. The mother trees are wise not just because of their own long experience, but because they are connected to vast networks of other organisms, each contributing their own knowledge and perspective to the community's collective intelligence. Their wisdom is distributed wisdom, shared wisdom, wisdom that belongs not to individuals but to the community as a whole. The tragic consequences of removing mother trees from forest communities offer sobering lessons for human societies as well. When we lose our elders, our community anchors, our repositories of cultural wisdom, we lose more than individuals. We lose the networks of relationships and accumulated knowledge that hold communities together. The fragmentation of forest communities after mother tree removal mirrors the social fragmentation we see in human communities when traditional support structures are disrupted. But the forest's capacity for recovery, its drive to rebuild networks and restore connection, even after severe disruption, offers hope for our own communities. The same impulses that drive trees to reach out and form new fungal partnerships, to share resources with strangers, to rebuild communication networks after they've been broken, exist in human communities as well. We are, like the trees, fundamentally social beings whose individual well-being depends on the health of our connections to others. As you drift towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll carry with you an image of those ancient mother trees, standing patient and generous in their forest communities, their vast underground networks humming with the quiet conversations that maintain life itself. Perhaps you'll think about the elders in your own community, the people who serve as anchors and resources for others, the networks of relationships that support and sustain you. The mother trees remind us that the greatest strength comes not from individual achievement, but from the depth and generosity of our connections to others. They show us that wisdom is something to be shared, not hoarded, and that the mark of true maturity is the ability to nurture and support the next generation, even when that nurturing comes at personal cost. In their patient, centuries-long commitment to community care, the mother trees offer us a vision of what human societies might become if we embrace the same values they've been practicing since long before our species existed. They remind us that we are not separate individuals struggling alone, but interconnected members of communities whose health depends on our willingness to share, to support, and to maintain the networks of relationship that make life not just possible, but beautiful. Rest well, knowing that somewhere tonight, ancient trees are standing watch over their forest families, sharing resources through underground networks older than civilization, passing wisdom to seedlings that may grow to nurture communities we will never see. Their patient work continues in the darkness, a reminder that the deepest wisdom often grows in the quiet spaces where generosity and connection flourish beyond the reach of human observation. Beneath your feet, as you rest comfortably wherever you are tonight, lies the world's most sophisticated pharmacy. It's a medicine cabinet that has been stocked and restocked for millions of years, tended by pharmacists who never sleep, dispensing treatments that are precisely tailored to the needs of each patient. This underground pharmacy operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, filling prescriptions written in the chemical language we've been learning together, delivered through the fungal networks that connect every living plant in the forest community. Imagine, if you will, walking into a human pharmacy and finding not just shelves of manufactured medicines, but living systems that can diagnose illness, compound custom treatments, and deliver medications directly to where they're needed most. This is exactly what happens in the soil beneath forest communities every single day. Plants don't just share carbon and minerals through their root networks, they share an astounding array of healing compounds, creating a community medicine system that rivals anything human science has achieved. The story begins with the plants themselves, each species a master chemist in its own right. Over millions of years of evolution, plants have developed the ability to synthesize thousands of different chemical compounds. Many of these molecules serve as the plant's own immune system, protecting against diseases, repelling insect attacks, and maintaining cellular health. But in the connected world of forest communities, these personal medicine cabinets become shared resources. Consider the willow tree, whose bark contains salicin, the compound from which we derived aspirin. In the forest, willow trees don't keep this valuable pain-relieving and anti-inflammatory compound to themselves. Through their fungal partners, they share salicin and related compounds with neighboring plants, creating a community-wide medicine chest that helps the entire forest deal with the cellular stress and inflammation that comes from environmental challenges. The Pacific yew produces Taxol, one of our most powerful cancer-fighting compounds. But in its natural forest home, Taxol serves a different purpose. It's part of the tree's chemical defense system against cellular damage and fungal infections. Through the underground networks, traces of Taxol and similar compounds circulate throughout the forest community, providing protection against diseases that might threaten the entire ecosystem. Every plant contributes its own unique medicines to this underground pharmacy. Oak trees share tannins that have powerful antimicrobial properties. Pine trees contribute terpenoids that can fight infections and reduce inflammation. Foxglove plants produce digitalis compounds that affect cellular function in ways that can be protective in small doses. Even common forest herbs like echinacea share their immune-boosting compounds through the root networks. The delivery system for this forest pharmacy is as remarkable as the medicines themselves. The fungal networks that connect plant roots serve as a sophisticated distribution system, capable of moving different chemical compounds to where they're needed most. It's as if the forest floor is crisscrossed with thousands of tiny intravenous lines, each one capable of delivering precise doses of healing compounds directly to the organisms that need them. What makes this system truly extraordinary is its responsiveness. When a plant becomes ill or stressed, it releases chemical distress signals into the network. These signals serve multiple purposes. They're calls for help, diagnostic information about the nature of the problem, and requests for specific types of assistance. The network responds by increasing the flow of relevant healing compounds toward the distressed plant, creating a targeted treatment plan that would impress any emergency room physician. Dr. Monica Gagliano, a researcher studying plant behavior, has documented cases where healthy plants seem to prepare healing compounds in advance of their neighbors' need for them. When one plant in a network becomes infected with a particular pathogen, nearby plants begin producing and sharing compounds that are specifically effective against that pathogen, even before they themselves are infected. It's as if the pharmacy is not just responding to current illness, but anticipating future medical needs. The precision of this system is breathtaking. Plants can distinguish between different types of threats and respond with appropriately targeted treatments. An attack by leaf-eating insects triggers the sharing of different compounds than an infection by root-dwelling fungi. Drought stress calls for a different chemical response than flooding. The underground pharmacy maintains a vast inventory of specialized treatments, each one precisely matched to specific conditions. Even more remarkably, the dosage seems to be automatically regulated. Plants receiving healing compounds through the network get just enough to address their specific condition, without the overdosing that can occur when organisms are exposed to high concentrations of bioactive compounds. The fungal delivery system appears to have built-in safeguards that prevent harmful accumulations of even beneficial medicines. The forest pharmacy doesn't just treat acute conditions, it also provides ongoing preventive care. Healthy plants continuously receive low-level doses of protective compounds from their network partners, creating a baseline of chemical protection that helps prevent illness before it starts. It's community medicine at its most sophisticated, where prevention and treatment are seamlessly integrated into the daily life of the forest. Perhaps most fascinatingly, this underground medicine system seems to learn and adapt. Networks that have successfully dealt with particular diseases or pests appear to maintain elevated levels of the relevant protective compounds, creating a form of community immunity that can last for years. The forest's immune system has memory, and it uses that memory to prepare for future challenges. In many ways, a forest community functions like a single massive organism with its own immune system, one that can detect threats, coordinate responses, and marshal defenses on a scale that encompasses entire ecosystems. This forest immune system operates through the same fungal networks we've been exploring, but when faced with disease or pest outbreaks, these networks shift into crisis mode, transforming from peaceful resource-sharing communities into coordinated defense systems of remarkable sophistication. The forest's immune response begins with surveillance. Throughout the network, individual plants serve as early warning sensors, constantly monitoring their local environment for signs of trouble. When a plant detects the presence of a pathogen, whether it's a disease-causing fungus, a viral infection, or an invasion of destructive insects, it immediately begins broadcasting chemical alarm signals through the fungal networks. These alarm signals are remarkably specific. A plant under attack by aphids sends out different chemical messages than one being invaded by root rot fungi. Each type of threat has its own chemical signature, allowing the forest community to understand not just that there's a problem, but exactly what kind of problem it is. It's as if each plant serves as a specialized diagnostic sensor in a vast early warning system. Once an alarm is raised, the forest's response is swift and coordinated. Plants throughout the network begin producing and sharing defensive compounds tailored to the specific threat. If the danger is a fungal pathogen, antifungal compounds begin flowing through the root networks. If insects are the problem, natural insecticides and feeding deterrents start circulating. The forest essentially custom compounds its own pesticides and medicines, using recipes refined over millions of years of evolutionary experience. The speed of this response can be astonishing. Researchers have documented cases where chemical defense compounds reach plants several hundred feet away from the initial infection within just a few hours. It's faster than most human emergency response systems, and it's happening continuously throughout every forest on Earth, usually without any sign visible to casual human observers. But the forest immune system goes beyond just chemical responses. Plants receiving alarm signals through the network begin making physical changes that enhance their resistance to attack. Leaves may become thicker or develop protective waxy coatings. Root systems may alter their growth patterns to avoid infected soil areas. Some plants even change their growth timing, accelerating or delaying key developmental phases to avoid periods when they would be most vulnerable to specific threats. The coordination of these responses reveals a level of community organization that challenges our understanding of plant behavior. During major disease outbreaks, the forest seems to implement strategies that can only be described as intelligent. Resources are redirected away from infected areas to prevent the spread of disease. Healthy plants increase their production of protective compounds, not just for their own benefit, but to share with threatened neighbors. Some plants even appear to sacrifice themselves, pouring their remaining energy into the network to help their community survive the crisis. One of the most remarkable aspects of the forest immune system is its ability to develop community-wide resistance to recurring threats. Networks that have successfully fought off particular diseases maintain elevated levels of relevant defensive compounds for months or even years afterward. It's as if the forest remembers its enemies and maintains a state of preparedness against their return. Dr. Suzanne Simard has documented forests that have developed sophisticated strategies for dealing with mountain pine beetle outbreaks, one of the most destructive forest pests in North America. In these forests, Healthy trees begin producing elevated levels of defensive compounds, even before beetle populations reach dangerous levels. They coordinate their defensive chemistry through the fungal networks, creating zones of beetle resistance that can slow or stop the spread of infestations. The forest immune system also demonstrates remarkable adaptability. When new threats appear, perhaps diseases introduced from other continents, or pests that have evolved new attack strategies, the forest community begins experimenting with different chemical defenses. Plants try various combinations of defensive compounds, sharing successful formulations through the network. Over time, the community develops new resistance strategies, essentially evolving its immune response in real time. Perhaps most impressively, the forest immune system can coordinate responses across vast scales. During regional disease outbreaks, the chemical signals and defensive responses can spread across entire watersheds, connecting forest patches that are miles apart. The result is landscape-scale immunity that can contain threats before they become ecosystem-wide disasters. This community immune system reveals forests to be far more than collections of individual trees. They are integrated living systems with emergent properties that arise from the complex interactions between all their members. The health of any individual plant is inseparable from the health of the entire network, and the survival strategies that have evolved reflect this fundamental interconnectedness. Perhaps the most puzzling aspect of the forest's underground pharmacy is how it seems to anticipate needs and deliver treatments with a precision that suggests something remarkably like intelligence. Plants appear to know things about their neighbors' health that should be impossible for organisms without brains or nervous systems to know. They respond to problems before they become visible, deliver healing compounds to exactly where they're needed, and coordinate treatment strategies across entire forest communities with a sophistication that challenges our understanding of plant capabilities. Dr. Monica Galliano's research has revealed behaviors that push the boundaries of what we thought plants could do. In carefully controlled experiments, she has shown that plants can distinguish between self and other, recognize individual neighbors, and even anticipate future needs based on past experiences. When one plant in a network experiences a particular type of stress, its neighbors begin preparing appropriate responses before they themselves show any signs of similar stress. The mystery deepens when we consider how chemical messages navigate through the fungal networks to reach their intended recipients. The underground fungal highways that connect forest plants are incredibly complex, with thousands of different pathways between any two trees. Yet somehow, chemical messages consistently reach the plants that need them most, as if the network itself is making intelligent routing decisions. Recent research suggests that the fungal networks may function more like neural networks than simple transportation systems. The fungal threads that make up these networks can process and integrate information, making decisions about where to route different chemical signals based on current network conditions. Some researchers have begun to suggest that these fungal networks may represent a form of distributed intelligence, where complex behaviors emerge from the interactions of countless simple components. The evidence for this intelligence is subtle but compelling. When multiple plants in a network are stressed simultaneously, the healing compounds don't just flow randomly. They're prioritized and directed to where they can do the most good. Plants that are more critical to network stability receive preferential treatment. Young seedlings get extra support during vulnerable periods. Even dying plants may receive resources if they're serving important network functions. Perhaps most mysteriously, the forest pharmacy seems to maintain an inventory of healing compounds that anticipates seasonal needs. Before winter arrives, defensive compounds that protect against cold stress begin circulating through the network. As spring approaches, growth-promoting hormones start flowing to where new growth will be most beneficial. The network appears to have its own calendar, coordinating treatments with the rhythm of the seasons. The targeting precision of chemical treatments in the forest is another puzzle that hints at underlying intelligence. When a specific tree is attacked by a particular pest, the network responds by increasing the flow of relevant defensive compounds specifically to that tree. But the treatment doesn't stop there. The network also begins preventively treating nearby trees that are most likely to be the next targets of the same pest. It's strategic medicine, anticipating the spread of problems and taking preemptive action. Some of the most intriguing research focuses on how plants seem to learn from experience. Networks that have dealt with particular challenges in the past respond more quickly and effectively when similar challenges return. The forest appears to develop treatment protocols based on what has worked before. refining its medical responses through something that looks very much like trial and error learning. Dr. Peter Folleben, author of The Hidden Life of Trees, has documented cases where forest communities appear to make collective decisions about resource allocation that benefit the long-term health of the entire ecosystem, even when these decisions come at short-term cost to individual trees. During severe drought, for example, the network may redirect water resources to maintain nursery areas where seedlings are establishing, even if this means mature trees must endure greater stress. The puzzle of plant intelligence becomes even more complex when we consider cross-species cooperation in healing networks. Plants from different families, with different evolutionary histories and different chemical capabilities, somehow coordinate their healing compounds to create synergistic treatments that are more effective than what any single species could provide alone. It's as if different plant species are consulting with each other to develop combination therapies. Emerging research on plant electrical signaling adds another layer to this mystery. Scientists have discovered that plants generate and respond to electrical signals that travel through their tissues much faster than chemical signals can move. These electrical signals may serve as a rapid communication system that coordinates with the slower chemical messaging of the fungal networks, creating multiple overlapping information systems within forest communities. The implications of this apparent plant intelligence are profound and unsettling to our traditional understanding of cognition. If forests can process information, make decisions, learn from experience, and coordinate complex responses across vast networks, what does this mean for our understanding of intelligence itself? Are we witnessing the operation of a form of consciousness so different from our own that we're only beginning to recognize it? As we pause here together in our journey through the forest's hidden world, let your mind rest on the profound realization that has been growing throughout our exploration. We are surrounded by intelligence, not the familiar intelligence of human thought, not the recognizable intelligence of animal behavior, but something far more ancient and vast, the distributed intelligence of living systems that have been solving complex problems for hundreds of millions of years. The forest pharmacy we've discovered is not just a collection of chemical reactions and resource exchanges. It is the visible expression of a form of collective intelligence that emerges from the interactions of countless individual organisms, each contributing its own capabilities to a community mind that spans entire ecosystems. This intelligence has no single location, no central processor, no commanding consciousness, yet it displays behaviors that we can only describe as thoughtful, strategic, and wise. Think about what we've learned together. Forests that can diagnose illness and deliver targeted treatments. Networks that anticipate problems and prepare solutions in advance. Communities that learn from experience and refine their responses over time. Systems that make strategic decisions about resource allocation for the long-term benefit of the whole. If we encountered these capabilities in any human-made system, we would immediately recognize them as signs of sophisticated intelligence. The humbling truth is that we are only beginning to understand the complexity of what exists beneath our feet. Every forest you've ever walked through, every park where you found peace, every tree-lined street in every city on Earth, all of them are nodes in vast thinking systems that dwarf our own intellectual achievements in their scope and sophistication. The forest's pharmacy and immune system represent just one facet of this intelligence. As researchers develop better tools for listening to plant communications and mapping fungal networks, we're discovering layer after layer of complexity that we never suspected. We're finding evidence of memory, learning, decision-making, and even what appears to be planning for future events. We're discovering that forests may be far more similar to brains than we ever imagined, distributed, organic thinking systems that process information on a planetary scale. This realization carries with it a profound shift in how we might understand our own place in the natural world. We are not outside observers of nature, looking in on mechanical systems that operate according to simple rules. We are participants in thinking systems of unimaginable complexity, systems that have been processing information and solving problems since long before our species existed. The chemicals that plants share through their root networks don't just affect other plants. They affect the soil microbes, the insects, the birds, and even the large mammals that live in forest communities. The boundaries between organisms become blurred when we realize that we're all participants in vast networks of chemical communication and resource sharing. The forest doesn't just surround us. We are part of the forest's thinking, part of its vast, distributed consciousness. Perhaps most wonderfully, this intelligence is fundamentally generous. The forest mind that emerges from millions of interacting organisms is not competitive or hoarding. It shares resources freely, provides healing to any community member in need, and prioritizes the long-term health of the whole system over short-term individual gain. It is intelligence in service of life itself, wisdom devoted to the flourishing of the entire community. As you continue towards sleep tonight, carried along by these revelations about the thinking world around us, consider this. Every breath you take connects you to the forest's chemical communications. Every step you take crosses the pathways of the underground networks. Every tree you pass is part of thinking systems that extend across continents and back through geological time. You are never alone in this world, not in the way we usually imagine loneliness. You are always part of vast, interconnected intelligence networks that include not just other humans, but other species, other kingdoms of life, other forms of consciousness that we're only beginning to recognize. The forest pharmacy that operates beneath your feet is also operating within you, as the plant compounds you breathe and consume become part of your own biological systems. The mystery and wonder of it all, that consciousness might be not just the province of animals, but a fundamental property of living systems themselves, invites us into a deeper relationship with the natural world, not as masters or even stewards, but as junior participants in thinking systems far older and wiser than ourselves. Systems that might have much to teach us about cooperation, generosity, and the patient work of creating communities that can flourish for millennia. Rest well tonight, knowing that the forest continues its thoughtful work in the darkness, its underground pharmacy, dispensing healing compounds with a precision and generosity that our greatest physicians can only aspire to match. The thinking systems of the earth never sleep, and their dreams are filled with the chemical poetry of life supporting life in an endless conversation of care. Deep beneath the earth's surface, in the quiet darkness, where root networks weave their ancient connections, one of the most important conversations on our planet is taking place. It's a conversation about carbon, that fundamental element of life that flows from atmosphere to leaf to root to soil in cycles so vast and intricate that we humans are only just beginning to understand their significance. The trees above our heads, connected through fungal networks below our feet, are engaged in a form of climate management that dwarfs our own technological efforts in both scale and sophistication. Every tree is, in essence, a carbon whisperer, an organism that speaks fluently in the language of atmospheric chemistry. Through photosynthesis, trees capture carbon dioxide from the air and transform it into the sugars that fuel forest life. But this is just the beginning of the story. Through their partnerships with soil fungi, trees have created vast underground carbon storage systems that represent one of our planet's most powerful tools for climate regulation. Imagine, as you rest comfortably in your quiet space, the journey of a single carbon atom, born in the breath of some distant creature, or perhaps released from the burning of ancient forests. This carbon atom drifts through the atmosphere until it encounters the leaf of a towering oak tree on a bright summer morning. In the green factories of the leaf's chloroplasts, our carbon atom is captured and bound into a molecule of glucose, suddenly transformed from a gas contributing to global warming into solid matter that will become part of the living world. But our carbon atom's journey is far from over. As the glucose molecule travels down through the tree's inner highways toward the roots, it carries with it not just energy, but information about the tree's current condition, its resource needs, and its willingness to share with the underground community. When it reaches the root tips, wrapped in their fungal partnerships, our carbon atom becomes part of an exchange that will determine its fate for decades or even centuries to come. Some carbon stays close to home, fueling the tree's own growth and becoming part of its wood, locked away for the lifetime of the tree, perhaps hundreds of years. But much of the carbon takes a different path, flowing into the fungal networks that connect the forest community. Here it begins a journey through what scientists are beginning to recognize as one of the Earth's most sophisticated carbon management systems. The fungal partners that receive carbon from tree roots don't just consume it, they invest it. They use some for their own growth, extending their networks ever deeper and wider through the soil. They trade some for minerals and nutrients that they gather from throughout the forest floor. And remarkably, they deposit much of it in the soil itself, creating vast underground carbon banks that can store carbon for decades, centuries, or even millennia. These soil carbon deposits represent one of the Earth's largest carbon reservoirs. The The carbon stored in forest soils around the world exceeds the carbon in all terrestrial vegetation and the atmosphere combined. It's a storage system that has been operating for hundreds of millions of years, and it's managed entirely by the underground partnerships between roots and fungi, guided by chemical conversations we're only beginning to understand. The sophistication of this carbon management system becomes apparent when we consider how forests respond to changing atmospheric conditions. Trees can sense when atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are rising, and they adjust their behavior accordingly. During periods of high atmospheric CO2, many trees increase their carbon capture and storage, essentially working harder to help balance the global carbon cycle. But the response isn't just individual, it's collective. Through their fungal networks, trees coordinate their carbon management activities across entire forest communities. When one part of a forest is capturing excess carbon, it can share that carbon with other parts of the network where it might be stored more effectively. The result is forest-scale optimization of carbon sequestration, with different areas of the forest specializing in different aspects of carbon management. Dr. Suzanne Simard's research has revealed that older forests are particularly effective at this carbon coordination. The ancient fungal networks in old-growth forests have had centuries to develop sophisticated carbon storage strategies. They've learned to route carbon to the soil conditions where it will be most stable, to the fungal partners that are most effective at long-term carbon storage, and to the locations where it will contribute most effectively to overall forest health. The trees and their fungal partners are also remarkably sensitive to climate change signals. They can detect subtle shifts in temperature, precipitation patterns, and seasonal timing that indicate changing climate conditions. These signals trigger adjustments in carbon management strategies that help forests adapt to new conditions while continuing to provide climate regulation services. Perhaps most remarkably, the forest carbon management system includes what can only be described as climate forecasting. Trees with access to extensive fungal networks seem to anticipate seasonal changes and climate variations, adjusting their carbon storage and sharing patterns in advance of predictable environmental shifts. They prepare for drought by increasing carbon storage in deeper soil layers, where it will be less affected by dry conditions. They respond to early indicators of harsh winters by shifting carbon allocation toward root systems that will need extra energy to survive the cold. The communication aspect of this carbon management is as important as the storage itself. Trees share information about carbon availability, storage capacity, and optimal allocation strategies through their chemical conversations in the soil. A forest with good communication networks can optimize its carbon sequestration across the entire ecosystem, ensuring that carbon is captured where conditions are best for photosynthesis and stored where conditions are best for long-term stability. These forest carbon conversations have profound implications for our understanding of climate change. The world's forests aren't just passive victims of changing climate conditions. They're active participants in climate regulation, constantly adjusting their carbon management strategies in response to changing conditions. Understanding and supporting these natural carbon management systems may be crucial for addressing the climate challenges of the coming decades. The underground carbon banks created by forest networks represent a form of natural climate infrastructure that we humans are only beginning to appreciate. These systems have been operating successfully for millions of years, storing vast quantities of carbon while simultaneously supporting the complex ecosystems that depend on forest health. They represent a model for carbon management that is simultaneously more sophisticated and more sustainable than anything human technology has yet achieved. Climate change is not a future possibility for the world's forests. It's a present reality they're already responding to with remarkable sophistication. Across the globe, forest communities are adapting to shifting weather patterns, changing seasonal timing, and new environmental stresses through the same fungal networks that have helped them survive past climate changes throughout Earth's history. What's emerging from recent research is a picture of forests as dynamic, adaptive systems that respond to climate challenges collectively, using their underground communication networks to coordinate survival strategies across entire ecosystems. The early warning systems that forests use to detect climate changes operate on multiple timescales simultaneously. On the shortest timescale, trees respond to immediate weather conditions, drought, unusual temperatures, unexpected storms, by sharing resources and information through their fungal networks. A tree experiencing water stress can receive emergency water supplies from neighbors with access to groundwater. A tree damaged by storms can receive extra nutrients to fuel its recovery. These immediate responses help individual trees survive acute climate stresses. But forests also operate early warning systems that detect longer-term climate trends. Trees with extensive root networks and old fungal partnerships have access to information from across wide geographic areas and from deep in the soil, where temperature and moisture conditions change more slowly than at the surface. This broader perspective allows forest communities to detect climate trends years or even decades before they become apparent to surface observations. When these long-term early warning systems detect climate shifts, forests begin making collective adjustments that prepare the entire community for new conditions. During the early stages of a regional drought, for example, trees throughout the network begin adjusting their water use patterns, even if they haven't yet experienced water stress themselves. They start storing more water in their tissues, sharing water more efficiently through fungal networks, and even adjusting their growth patterns to reduce their overall water needs. The coordination of these climate responses reveals sophisticated collective decision-making processes within forest communities. Different species contribute different strengths to climate adaptation strategies. Deep-rooted trees provide access to groundwater during droughts. Trees with extensive canopies provide shade and humidity that moderate local temperatures. Fast-growing pioneer species help forests recover quickly from climate-related disturbances, while slow-growing climax species provide stability and long-term carbon storage. Through their fungal networks, these different species coordinate their responses to maximize the forest community's overall resilience. During heat waves, shade-providing trees increase their resource sharing with more vulnerable understory plants. During droughts, trees with deep roots share water with shallow-rooted neighbors. During recovery from climate-related disturbances, fast-growing trees provide temporary canopy coverage, while slower-growing trees gradually establish the forest structure that will provide long-term stability. Perhaps most remarkably, forest communities appear to plan for future climate conditions based on current trends. Trees experiencing the early stages of climate change begin producing seeds with genetic variations that may be better adapted to the future conditions they anticipate. Through their networks, they share information about which genetic traits are proving most successful under changing conditions, essentially accelerating their own evolutionary responses to climate change. The migration patterns of forests, how forest communities shift their geographic ranges in response to changing climate conditions, are also coordinated through underground networks. As climate zones shift, forests at the edges of their current ranges begin extending fungal connections toward areas with more favorable future conditions. These connections serve as pathways for genetic material, nutrients, and information that help establish new forest communities in areas where the climate is becoming more suitable. At the same time, forests facing increasingly challenging conditions don't simply abandon their current locations. Instead, they use their networks to support the most climate-resilient members of their communities, essentially investing in the individuals most likely to survive and reproduce under new conditions. This targeted support helps ensure that forest communities can persist even as climate conditions change around them. The role of fungal networks in climate adaptation extends beyond individual forest stands to entire landscapes. Networks of fungal connections between forest patches can span miles, creating landscape-scale communication and resource-sharing systems that help coordinate climate responses across vast areas. During regional droughts, these landscape networks can move water resources from areas with better water access to areas experiencing more severe stress. During recovery from large-scale climate disturbances, they can facilitate the movement of genetic material and resources needed for ecosystem restoration. Dr. Peter Wolleben has documented cases where forest communities appear to make collective sacrifices to ensure climate resilience. During severe climate stresses, some older trees invest heavily in supporting younger, more climate-adapted individuals, even when this investment comes at the cost of their own survival. It's as if the forest community is making strategic decisions about which individuals to support based on their potential contributions to long-term climate adaptation. The climate adaptation strategies of forest networks also include what researchers are calling assisted migration, the deliberate movement of species to areas where future climate conditions may be more suitable than current conditions. Through their underground networks, forests can facilitate the establishment of tree species in areas slightly outside their current ranges, essentially helping species migrate toward more favorable future climates. These natural climate adaptation systems offer profound lessons for human climate adaptation strategies. Forests demonstrate the value of early warning systems that operate on multiple timescales, collective decision-making processes that coordinate responses across entire communities, and support systems that prioritize the most vulnerable community members during climate stresses. They show us that successful climate adaptation requires not individual resilience, but community resilience based on mutual support and resource sharing. The resilience of forest networks in the face of climate change also reveals the critical importance of maintaining connectivity between natural areas. Fragmented forests, isolated from their surrounding networks, are much more vulnerable to climate stresses than forests that remain connected to broader landscape-scale networks. The fungal highways that connect forest communities are essential infrastructure for climate adaptation, as important for ecosystem survival as any human-built infrastructure is for human communities. Long before scientists developed instruments sensitive enough to detect the chemical conversations flowing through forest soils, indigenous peoples around the world understood that forests were not collections of individual trees, but integrated communities engaged in constant communication and mutual support. This traditional knowledge, passed down through countless generations of careful observation and interaction with forest ecosystems, offers profound insights into how we might work with natural systems to address the environmental challenges of our time. The indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, whose lives have been intertwined with old-growth forests for thousands of years, have always understood what Western science has only recently discovered: that the health of any individual tree is inseparable from the health of the entire forest community. Their traditional forest management practices were designed to support not just individual trees, but the relationships between trees, the fungi that connect them, and the complex web of life that depends on these connections. Traditional burning practices, used by indigenous peoples across North America, Australia, and other continents, were not simply methods of clearing land or hunting game. They were sophisticated ecosystem management techniques that worked with the natural communication networks of forests to maintain ecosystem health and resilience. These controlled burns, conducted at specific times and in specific patterns, actually strengthened fungal networks by clearing out competing vegetation and returning nutrients to the soil in forms that could be easily accessed by root fungus partnerships. The Menominee Nation of Wisconsin has practiced sustainable forestry for over 150 years, maintaining a forest that has actually increased in health and productivity over time, rather than declining. Their approach, based on traditional ecological knowledge, focuses on supporting the relationships between forest organisms rather than simply harvesting individual trees. They thin forests to reduce competition, but they do so in ways that maintain the fungal networks that connect remaining trees. They harvest timber, but they time their harvests to work with the seasonal cycles of nutrient sharing and communication that keep forest communities healthy. In the Amazon rainforest, indigenous peoples have developed agroforestry systems that mimic the natural networking patterns of the forest itself. Instead of clearing large areas for agriculture, they create small clearings connected by corridors of forest vegetation. These corridors maintain the fungal networks that connect different parts of the forest, allowing the ecosystem to continue its natural resource sharing and communication, even in areas where human agriculture is practiced. The traditional ecological knowledge of the Anishinaabe peoples includes detailed understanding of the seasonal cycles of forest communication and resource sharing. Their harvesting practices are timed to work with these cycles, taking only what the forest can spare without disrupting the underground networks that maintain ecosystem health. They understand that harvesting during certain seasons can strengthen forest communities by removing stressed individuals and allowing networks to redirect resources toward healthier community members. Australian Aboriginal peoples developed fire management techniques that have maintained some of the world's most complex and biodiverse ecosystems for tens of thousands of years. Their cultural burning practices work with the natural communication networks of Australian forests and grasslands, using fire as a tool to facilitate the flow of nutrients and information through ecosystem networks. Recent research has shown that landscapes managed using traditional Aboriginal fire practices to maintain more extensive and resilient fungal networks than areas managed using European fire suppression techniques. The traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples also includes sophisticated understanding of how forest communities respond to environmental changes. Many indigenous cultures have legends and practices that describe how forests collectively prepare for droughts, floods, and other environmental challenges. These traditional accounts often include details about plant behavior that Western science has only recently confirmed, such as the ability of trees to share resources during environmental stress and to coordinate their responses to changing conditions. Perhaps most importantly, indigenous traditional knowledge recognizes forests as teachers, complex systems from which humans can learn principles of community organization, resource sharing, and collective resilience. Many indigenous cultures include practices specifically designed to learn from forest communities, such as meditation in forest settings, careful observation of plant behavior, and ceremonial practices that acknowledge the wisdom of forest ecosystems. Modern biomimicry researchers are beginning to apply lessons learned from forest networks to human technological and social systems. The internet itself was inspired partly by observations of natural networks, though the full sophistication of forest communication systems has only become apparent in recent decades. Now, researchers are working to develop new forms of distributed computing, resource-sharing networks, and even architectural systems based on principles learned from fungal networks. The concept of smart cities increasingly draws inspiration from forest ecosystems, with urban planners working to create cities that share resources efficiently, respond adaptively to changing conditions, and maintain resilience through diversified networks of connections. Green infrastructure projects that maintain urban forest networks are being recognized not just as aesthetic improvements, but as essential infrastructure for urban climate resilience. Agricultural researchers are developing farming systems based on forest networking principles, creating food production systems that maintain soil fungal networks, support biodiversity, and build long-term soil health rather than depleting it. These agroecological approaches recognize that sustainable food production requires working with natural networks, rather than replacing them with simplified industrial systems. The traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples and the emerging insights of forest network research converge on a fundamental understanding. The health of human communities is inseparable from the health of the natural networks that surround and support us. The same principles that allow forest communities to thrive for centuries: mutual support, resource sharing, collective decision-making, and adaptive response to environmental changes, are principles that human communities need to adopt if we are to address the environmental and social challenges of the coming decades. Climate change, biodiversity loss, social inequality, and resource depletion are all challenges that require collective responses based on the same kinds of networking principles that have allowed forest ecosystems to thrive for millions of years. The underground networks that connect forest communities offer us more than just carbon storage and biodiversity conservation. They offer us models for how complex communities can organize themselves to thrive over long timescales in the face of environmental uncertainty. The wisdom embedded in forest networks is ancient, but it's also urgently relevant to our modern challenges. By learning from these natural systems, by supporting them, and by applying their principles to our own communities, we can work toward a future where human societies function as sustainably and reliably as the forest ecosystems that have inspired and sustained our species throughout our evolutionary history. As we pause here together in our exploration of the Earth's ancient climate management systems, take a moment to let this profound realization settle into your awareness. The natural world is not broken. Despite all the challenges of climate change, despite all the disruptions humans have caused to natural systems, the fundamental networks that have maintained life on Earth for hundreds of millions of years are still functioning, still adapting, still working tirelessly to maintain the conditions that make life possible. Beneath your feet right now, whether you're in a city or surrounded by wilderness, the patient work continues. Fungal networks are moving carbon from atmosphere to soil, creating the underground carbon banks that could help stabilize our climate. Trees are sharing information about changing weather patterns, coordinating their responses to environmental challenges with a sophistication that exceeds our most advanced computer networks. Forest communities are adapting to climate change using strategies refined over millions of years of environmental variability. This is not a passive process, not a mechanical system running down like a clock, but an active, intelligent, adaptive response to changing conditions. The forests of the world are not victims of climate change. They are climate change responders, constantly adjusting their carbon management strategies, their resource-sharing patterns, and their community structures to maintain ecosystem health under new conditions. The scale of this response is breathtaking. Every forest on Earth is part of a global climate management system that operates through the accumulated decisions of trillions of individual organisms, all connected through underground networks that span continents. Every tree, every fungus, every root system is part of this vast, collaborative effort to maintain the atmospheric and soil conditions that support life on Earth. And we humans are not separate from this system. We are part of it, participants in climate conversations that include not just our own species but every living thing on the planet. The carbon in our bodies was recently part of the atmospheric pool that forests are working to manage. The oxygen we breathe is produced by the same photosynthetic processes that capture carbon for forest networks. The soil that grows our food is maintained by the same fungal partnerships that store carbon in forest ecosystems. This interconnection offers profound hope for addressing climate change, but it also comes with profound responsibility. The health of the climate management systems that forests provide depends on our willingness to work with these systems rather than against them. Every forest we protect maintains part of the global carbon management network. Every natural area we restore adds capacity to the Earth's climate response systems. Every garden we plant using ecological principles extends the networks that help maintain environmental stability. The traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples offers us guidance for how to be good participants in these natural networks. Their practices show us how human communities can be integrated into natural systems in ways that strengthen rather than weaken the networks that maintain ecosystem health. Their understanding of forests as teachers reminds us that we have much to learn from systems that have been solving environmental challenges for millions of years longer than our species has existed. The emerging science of forest networks offers us tools for understanding and supporting these natural climate systems. Every new discovery about how trees communicate, how fungi manage resources, how forest communities adapt to environmental change, gives us better insight into how we can work with these systems to address climate challenges. Perhaps most hopefully, the resilience and adaptability of forest networks demonstrates that the Earth's living systems are not fragile entities that will collapse under the pressure of human impact. They are robust, adaptive systems that have survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, and countless other environmental challenges. They are actively working to accommodate the changes we've caused to global climate systems, and they have the capacity to help stabilize our climate if we give them the support they need. The underground conversations about climate that flow through root networks every day are conversations about hope, about adaptation, about the patient work of maintaining life in the face of environmental challenges. These conversations have been continuing for millions of years, and they will continue for millions of years to come, as long as we maintain the networks that make them possible. Your role in these conversations is not as an outside observer, but as a participant. Every choice you make about how to interact with natural systems either supports or disrupts the networks that maintain climate stability. Every tree you choose not to remove, every natural area you choose to protect, every garden you plant using ecological principles, adds to the capacity of natural systems to respond to climate challenges. The comfort that comes from understanding these natural climate systems is not the comfort of passive hope, but the comfort of knowing that we are part of larger systems that are actively working to maintain the conditions for life. It's the comfort of knowing that we're not alone in facing climate challenges, that we're part of a planetary community of living systems, all working toward the same goal of maintaining a stable, life-supporting environment. As you continue towards sleep tonight, perhaps you'll carry with you an image of these vast underground conversations about climate and adaptation, the patient exchange of carbon and information that connects every forest on Earth in a shared effort to maintain the atmospheric conditions that make life possible. Perhaps you'll rest a little easier, knowing that this ancient, sophisticated climate management system continues its work through every season, through every weather pattern, through every challenge our changing world presents. The Earth is still breathing steadily through its forest lungs, still storing carbon in its underground banks, still sharing resources through its root networks to maintain the delicate balance that supports all life. The conversations in the soil never stop, and they are always conversations about hope, about adaptation, about the endless creativity of life, finding ways to thrive in the face of any challenge. Rest well, knowing that you are held by systems far older and wiser than any human institution, systems that have maintained life on Earth through challenges that dwarf our current climate crisis, systems that continue their patient work of healing and adaptation even as you sleep, connected to them through every breath, every heartbeat, every moment of your existence on this remarkable planet. In the quiet darkness beneath our feet, something remarkable is happening that challenges everything we thought we knew about the nature of communication itself. Recent discoveries have revealed that the fungal networks connecting forest communities don't just carry chemical messages and share resources. They pulse with electrical signals that create rhythms and patterns so complex and beautiful that scientists have begun to describe them as a form of music. It's a symphony that has been playing in the Earth's soil for hundreds of millions of years. A composition of such intricacy that we're only now developing instruments sensitive enough to detect its quietest notes. Dr. Andrew Adamatsky, a computer scientist who has spent years studying the electrical properties of fungal networks, describes his first encounter with these signals with the wonder of someone discovering a new form of art. Using arrays of microelectrodes placed delicately into fungal tissue, he began detecting patterns of electrical activity that bore striking resemblances to the neural activity found in animal brains. But these weren't the chaotic firings of individual neurons. They were organized, rhythmic patterns that seemed to carry information across vast networks of fungal threads. The electrical signals in fungal networks pulse at frequencies that range from barely detectable whispers to rapid-fire bursts of activity. Like the different instruments in an orchestra, different parts of the network seem to play at different tempos and in different keys. The fine hyphal threads that make the initial connections between plant roots carry quick, high-frequency signals. The piccolo section of the soil symphony. The larger fungal structures that form the backbone of the network pulse with slower, more resonant frequencies. The bass notes that provide the fundamental rhythm for the entire composition. What makes these electrical signals particularly fascinating is their apparent organization. Random electrical activity would produce something like noise, but what researchers are detecting has structure, rhythm, and what can only be described as musical logic. The signals seem to respond to each other, creating call and response patterns that echo across the network. When one part of the fungal web increases its electrical activity, other parts respond with complementary rhythms, as if different sections of the network are engaging in electrical conversations. The tempo of these underground electrical symphonies changes with the seasons, with weather conditions, and with the health of the forest community above. During the active growing season, the electrical activity increases in both frequency and complexity, creating rich, multi-layered compositions that reflect the busy exchange of resources and information happening throughout the network. During winter dormancy, the electrical music becomes simpler and slower, but it never stops entirely. Even in the depths of winter, the fungal networks maintain a quiet electrical hum that keeps the forest community connected. Perhaps most remarkably, different species of fungi seem to have their own electrical signatures, their own characteristic rhythms and frequencies that they contribute to the larger symphony. Oak-associated fungi pulse with different patterns than pine-associated fungi. The electrical signatures of fungi in healthy forests are different from those in stressed or damaged ecosystems. It's as if each fungal species is playing its own unique instrument in the great orchestra of the soil. The complexity of these electrical patterns suggests they're carrying far more information than simple on-off signals. Like the digital communications that power our modern world, the electrical signals in fungal networks appear to be encoded with multiple layers of meaning. Changes in frequency might indicate one type of information, changes in amplitude another, changes in rhythm yet another. The result is a communication system of staggering sophistication, one that can carry multiple simultaneous conversations across networks that span entire forest ecosystems. Dr. Monica Gagliano, whose research has revealed so many surprising aspects of plant behavior, has suggested that these electrical signals might be the forest's equivalent of a nervous system, a way for the entire ecosystem to integrate information and coordinate responses across vast scales. If this is true, then the electrical music of the mycorrhizae isn't just communication between individual organisms, but the actual thought processes of the forest itself, made audible through sensitive instruments. The rhythms of root networks also seem to synchronize with larger environmental cycles in ways that suggest deep connections to the planet's own electrical and magnetic fields. Some researchers have detected electrical patterns in fungal networks that pulse in harmony with the Earth's natural electromagnetic rhythms, as if the forest is literally tuned to the electrical heartbeat of the planet itself. This electrical dimension of forest communication adds an entirely new layer to our understanding of how these networks operate. The chemical messages we've explored in previous chapters might carry the content of forest conversations, but the electrical signals might carry their timing, their urgency, their emotional tone. Together, they create a communication system that rivals anything in the natural world in its complexity and beauty. The discovery of electrical music in fungal networks also suggests new possibilities for understanding and interacting with natural systems. If forests are indeed generating their own forms of music, then perhaps learning to listen to these natural rhythms could help us understand forest health, predict ecosystem changes, and even find new ways to support the networks that support all terrestrial life. The quest to actually hear the conversations of plants and fungi has led scientists down some of the most fascinating rabbit holes in modern research. Using increasingly sensitive instruments, researchers have begun translating the electrical and chemical signals of forest networks into audible sounds, creating the first opportunities for humans to literally listen in on the conversations that have been happening beneath our feet for millions of years. Dr. Monica Gagliano pioneered some of the most intriguing work in this field by demonstrating that plants produce acoustic vibrations, actual sound waves, during their normal life processes. Using laser Doppler vibrometry, a technique borrowed from engineering that can detect vibrations too small for any other instrument to measure, she discovered that plant roots produce clicking sounds as they grow, and that these sounds change depending on what the roots encounter in their environment. The sounds of roots growing are surprisingly varied and complex. When a root encounters an obstacle, the clicking pattern changes. When it finds a source of water or nutrients, different acoustic signatures emerge. When roots from different plants encounter each other, they produce distinctive sound patterns that seem to be forms of recognition signals. It's as if the plants are introducing themselves to each other through sound, announcing their species, their needs, their willingness to cooperate or compete. Perhaps most remarkably, Dr. Gagliano's research has shown that plants can hear and respond to the sounds made by other plants. Roots, growing in complete darkness, with no chemical cues to guide them, will grow toward the sound of water flowing through pipes, toward the acoustic vibrations produced by other plant roots, even toward recordings of sounds that other plants have made. It suggests that the forest floor is filled with acoustic conversations that we never suspected existed. Other researchers have developed techniques for translating the electrical signals in fungal networks into audible music. By feeding the electrical patterns detected in soil into computer programs that convert electrical signals to sound waves, scientists have created audio recordings of fungal network activity that sound remarkably like experimental music. These recordings reveal rhythms, harmonies, and patterns that change in real time as the networks respond to environmental conditions. The music of mycorrhizae, when made audible through these technological translations, has an otherworldly beauty that reflects the alien intelligence of fungal networks. It's not music as humans would compose it, but it has its own logic, its own aesthetic that speaks to something deeper than conscious understanding. Listening to these recordings can be a meditative experience, a way of connecting with the non-human intelligence that surrounds us. Some of the most poetic discoveries have come from researchers who have learned to listen to forests during different seasons and times of day. The acoustic and electrical activity of forest networks follows daily and seasonal rhythms that mirror the broader patterns of forest life. During the day, when photosynthesis is active and chemical communications are most intense, the electrical music of the networks becomes more complex and energetic. At night, the rhythms slow and simplify, but they don't stop. The networks maintain their quiet conversations, even in the darkness. Spring brings an explosion of acoustic and electrical activity as plants emerge from winter dormancy and begin forming new connections. Summer maintains a steady, complex rhythm of mature network activity. Fall brings changes in tempo and frequency as plants begin their preparations for winter dormancy. Winter's music is the quietest, but perhaps the most beautiful, simple, slow rhythms that maintain the essential connections that will burst back into full complexity when spring returns. The meditation of listening to these natural frequencies can be profoundly calming and centering. Unlike human-made music, which is designed to trigger emotional responses and tell stories, the music of natural networks seems to invite a different kind of listening, one that doesn't try to interpret or understand, but simply experiences the rhythms of living systems that have been composing their slow symphonies since long before human consciousness emerged. Researchers have also discovered that human brainwaves can synchronize with the electrical rhythms of forest networks. When people spend extended time in natural settings, especially old-growth forests with well-developed fungal networks, their brain activity begins to match some of the same frequencies found in the electrical signals of the mycorrhizal networks. It's as if our nervous systems are naturally attuned to the rhythms of the natural world, and spending time in forests allows us to literally get back in sync with the electrical music of the earth. This synchronization might explain why spending time in nature feels so restorative to human well-being. We might not just be breathing cleaner air and experiencing visual beauty. We might be reconnecting with electrical rhythms that our nervous systems evolved to resonate with, finding our way back into harmony with the larger symphony of life that includes all living systems. The tools for listening to natural networks continue to evolve, and citizen scientists are beginning to participate in this research. Simple devices that can detect and record the electrical activity of plants and fungi are becoming available to amateur researchers, creating opportunities for anyone to begin listening to the conversations happening in their own gardens, local parks, or nearby forests. The act of listening to these natural frequencies is becoming a form of meditation, a way of connecting with the non-human intelligence that surrounds us. It's a practice that requires patience and a willingness to let go of human expectations about what communication should sound like, but it offers rewards that go beyond scientific knowledge into the realm of direct experience of our connection to the living world. As we draw near to the end of our journey through the hidden language of roots, it's time to pause and reflect on the profound poetry embedded in everything we've discovered together. The networks that connect plants through fungal partnerships aren't just biological phenomena or ecological processes. They're living metaphors for the deepest truths about connection, communication, and community that apply as much to human relationships as they do to forest ecosystems. Think about the fundamental grammar of root network communication. It's based on sharing rather than hoarding, on mutual support rather than competition, on patient listening rather than aggressive broadcasting. When a tree has excess resources, it shares them through the network. When a tree is in distress, it receives support from its neighbors. When important information needs to be communicated, it flows through the network to reach everyone who needs to know. This is the poetry of connection made manifest in living systems. Forest networks reveal a deep, poetic wisdom rooted in generosity, patience, and connection. Unlike human systems that amplify the loudest voices, these underground networks ensure that even the tiniest seedlings receive the support they need. Resources are shared across species, boundaries dissolve, and the community becomes stronger through inclusivity. Trees as different as Douglas firs and paper birches form lifelong partnerships, exchanging nutrients and information through their fungal allies. These intimate connections create a web of care that transcends species lines and evolves over decades. Mother trees may support young saplings for years before receiving anything in return, a quiet lesson in patience and generational investment. In forest ecosystems, personal success and community well-being go hand in hand. The most thriving trees also give the most sharing resources, supporting younger growth and strengthening the network that sustains the whole forest. Diversity of species, age, and survival strategies adds to this strength, making the network more resilient in times of fire, storm, or disease. Instead of breaking apart under stress, these underground systems grow even more generous and interconnected. Though science has uncovered much about these mycorrhizal networks, their full intelligence remains a mystery. Communication happens not from a central source, but through millions of small interactions, an elegant, ancient complexity beyond our own systems. And we are not separate from these networks. The carbon in our bodies, the soil beneath our homes, the air we breathe, all are part of the same cycles forests regulate. The root systems that sustain trees also sustain us. We are participants in this living web, not outsiders. Remember the seed in the soil, which once seemed alone. Now we know it rests in a vibrant, whispering network of fungi, roots, and signals. The moment it sprouts, it joins a conversation that's been going on for millions of years, one of cooperation, patience, and shared survival. As you fall asleep tonight, this network continues its ancient work. Roots share nutrients, fungi pass chemical messages, the forest breathes. And beneath your feet, whether you're in a forest, garden, or city, the earth's quiet intelligence flows. This underground civilization is older and more generous than any human creation. It has no cities or monuments, yet it survives through mutual support, reminding us that life thrives not in isolation, but through connection. Sleep peacefully, held by this patient world. You are not alone. You are part of the poetry of life.